There we go. So, hello, everybody. This is the children's fiction panel, and we are here with some lovely ladies here, and who are going to talk to you all about that. And I'll introduce you to our panelists. So we have Michelle, who is a self-published picture book author and illustrator with a focus on socio-emotional learning and nonfiction. She has over a decade's worth of education experience in after school education, homeschool groups, and school and library visits, and runs an educational nonprofit. Her social media posts are full of rabbits, chickens, and art. And I absolutely love rabbits and chickens, so I can that's to those.
Lots
Then
of
we
shit.
have Gabienne. She is an author, multimedia, and screenwriter. She has written commercially published books that span across children's picture books, chapter books, and young adult fiction. It is spanning fantasy, social justice, and historical fiction. She has been published in by Scholastic and Omnibus Australia, New Frontier published in UK and Australia, Rockpool Publishing, and Clandestine Press, with whom she has just released her first novel for adults. Gabienne's work has won several international awards, including the White Raven Award for Children's Writing, the Adam Interactive Children's Writing Award, and is currently featured on school and premier reading lists. When not writing, Gabienne is a professional editor and lectures in narrative theory at several Australian universities. Great job. And we have Amber, who is back on here. She is from the UK, and she is writing a middle grade supernatural horror for the First Look deal at Chicken House Publishing. She was the winner of the Golden Egg Academy Award in 2022, which gives her mentorship and editing from one of the leading editors in children's fiction in the UK. All right, pretty cool. So those are very talented ladies here. So we will go ahead and to the questions. Just a moment here. There we go. Okay. So our first question we have here is what publishers are looking for in writing for middle grade and why? What do they want basically?
Yeah, hi. So, although my experience working with my editor has been in the UK, Chicken House is linked to Scholastic. So this is kind of globally, and the UK actually kind of follows the US. So this will be more relevant to the US. At the moment, the middle grade fantasy market is a bit saturated. So because of the backlog after COVID, there's been like a saturation of the middle grade fantasy. My editor emphasizes that doesn't mean don't write it. It means that if you've written it, maybe shelve it for a couple of years. You can see it making a comeback, but it's something which it's about timing more often than not when it comes to writing any book, but especially children's literature, getting in the right place at the right time. What they are looking for middle grade is middle grade horror, especially with humor put in there, but there's a huge call for middle grade horror and younger middle grade humor, like really just ridiculously funny stories for younger, and also contemporary middle grade that take a look at issues that are going on in the world but are very positive with it, as in empowering children that they can make a difference in this world. Those are the three kind of main things with middle grade. Again, if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I've got this epic fantasy middle grade and now I'm really upset, don't worry, everything cycles. I got told before I won the award with my horror, I was told I'd written a boarding school story, and I was told boarding school stories are dead. If I'd sent it 10 years ago, it would have been published. All of a sudden, boarding school stories are back. So, things come around in cycles. YA, there's a huge market for YA right now, especially the younger side of YA. So you get YA, you get kind of younger YA, main YA, and then crossover, which is going more into kind of adult. There's a really big call for this. The age group that's been missing are 13, 14, 15-year-olds. They are young adults. They're not children anymore. But the YAs that are out there are maybe a little bit too YA for them,
Adult
because yes,
or too adult, because
Too
I have a
adult.
15 and a 13-year-old boy, and they do not want to read any of that mess.
exactly. So it's that kind of one where it's aiming at the 13, 14-year-olds. That is classed as YA. Again, everything in that: horror, fantasy, sci-fi. Romance is a bit oversaturated, but no one's ever going to say no to more romance, especially if it's representative, LGBTQ, disability, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, YA, pretty much anything goes at the moment.
Well, thank you so much. Okay. So our next question, we are going to talk about sensitive topics. So what do you define sensitive topics in children's fiction? How would you handle them?
Sensitive topics.
Yeah.
So this is a big thing at the moment, where I know in the UK and the US it's probably a little bit more than in Australia where I'm based, but we're starting to see it, that there is real concern around what you might be able to publish and what you might be able to talk about and all of that kind of stuff, sometimes for really good reasons. I think ultimately as writers we've just got to know what we want to talk about and know why we want to do that. Think about what our intention is. I think if you're doing a sensitive topic because you think it'll get, attention, and you think that, you'll get publicity around it and you want to shock and do all that sort of stuff, that's never okay. I just think that's just a really poor reason to do anything. But I think if you're doing something because it's something you think needs to be talked about, children are humans, they have human emotions, they have human experiences, they're coming into things often in a new way. And so books and media is the way that they're navigating the world. So we can't ignore it. So in that way, I'd say there's nothing that's really you can't do, but the way you approach it is really about your intention, and who your audience is, and really making sure that it's appropriate for that audience. Michelle?
So would you say then that there's a difference between it being your main topic and being a mention in the book, which an editor might edit out or edit down?
Yeah, I think so. I think, again, you've got to think, what does the story need, right? I work as an editor as well, so that's my kind of other day job. And I spend a lot of time talking to authors about why you're doing this, and is this, you do really need this, because a lot of my work is cutting down word limits. So there's a lot of discussion about, do we really need this, and where can we make cuts? And I think if it's just there to fill pages, you can always tell. If it's just there because you think, oh, I haven't done that yet, you can always tell. And again, I think a lot of it's put in because people think they have to, rather than because it's good for the story.
Right. Like I remember reading Speak as a kid, and that's about abuse. But if you're reading a book about something else and then there's random abuse in it, that's handled differently than if it's the main topic.
Yeah. I think it's really difficult to do something that is going to be, for want of a better word, triggering, because we'll just use that term. I know there's lots of issues around that term, but it's useful in this context. If you're not going to do that, then it's your responsibility as a writer, and also I think my responsibility as an editor, to kind of think about, well, what's the impact of this and why are you doing it? And again, are you going into enough depth? Are you going into enough to really do this well, or is it really just surface stuff and not particularly useful? So that's sort of triggering stuff. When you get into genres have their own set, and Rebecca can talk about this with the horror. I think that's what you're going to bring in too, that there are certain genres that you make that deal, right? You go, okay, I'm going to go into horror world. I'm going to go. Now, there are going to be different appropriate levels for different ages, but essentially you want to be scared. You want to be kind of outraged. You want to be upset. You want to deal with a problem. You go into these particular genres to do that. And I think that's kind of the key.
I think, that's the interesting thing about children's fiction is that, in theory, you can do anything. An example I always give is a picture book called Not Now, Bernard, written in the 70s, where halfway through the book, the main character, the little boy protagonist, literally gets eaten alive by the monster. It's kind of off page, but he does. And then the monster kind of takes his place. Like, that's the death of a main character in a picture book. But it's the way that it's done. You get Roald Dahl gets away with a lot in his stories because of the way it's done.
Mm.
But it's kind of about, first of all, making it absolutely clear what your book is. So if it's a book about abuse, then it should be really clear on the page, but also in the first few chapters. You don't want to say, other than YA is a different kettle of fish because it's more adult. You can play around a bit more because they're a bit more mature and ready for it. But especially with middle grade and lower, there isn't really sensitive topics as such, because it depends on the book you're writing, because you might be writing a very specific book aimed at helping children who are the victims of abuse, and that's a very specific audience. But on the whole, if you want to be commercially successful, there are certain things in middle grade and below that are not really acceptable, and that includes anything love beyond just holding hands and maybe a peck on the cheek. That includes, you could do murder mysteries. Murder mysteries are huge in the UK, but we don't know the victim. It's not like a murder mystery where you get to know the victim. It's more kind of, here, we're going to solve this mystery and piece all these clues together. Yeah, and no grisliness unless it's ridiculously over the top and cartoonish.
Yeah. I think that's the problem we get into, is we sort of lump children as this Morpheus group, as though we're doing children's writing and it's all, but of course it's not. It's really determinate on age and cultural background and
speaking of culture, Gabion, one of the things that I found interesting is that there were more things, what I was told, because Scholastic is in the UK, the US and Australia, and as a writer, I would need to be published in all those areas, and we've been told outright that America is more strict than the UK is about what will be allowed, and Australia is ridiculously strict, and that my book might not even be allowed to be published in Australia because it's dealing with the occult, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the occult's going to be a major problem. We do have a pretty good kind of children's horror stuff. I think where we get into real issues is we don't like to single out anyone. And so that's sort of a real issue. So my recent book, which was middle grade, was set in King's Cross, which, for those of you who are not kind of aware of Australia, King's Cross is essentially the red light district. So it is where there is a lot of really adult stuff that goes on, and it was set in the 1970s, which was like the peak of this. The reason for that is because the historical events that happened in that place and at that time, and we want to talk about those historical events because they were very important to Australian history. So I had to think about how much of that do I include. So sex and religion is always going to be a problem here. Partly because we're so tolerant, we don't want anybody to feel like they're being singled out or talked about really at all. So we kind of try to avoid everything, which is really interesting. But once you work that out, you just think, okay, that's fine. And again, it's about what's the story. So I kind of make allusions to blonde-headed women in impossibly high heels. And that's it, right? Because from a kid's point of view, that's what they would see. They don't know that other stuff, right? And so this is kind of the way that you get around a lot of those things. You just think about, well, actually, it's if you sort of take the child's perspective, you'll probably be fine.
I think when we were talking about this panel, at least one of you had some things, surprise things edited out of your books.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was one of my friends she writes middle grade. She's published by HarperCollins. Her second series is a murder mystery, and it's a girl who can kind of talk to ghosts, but not in the way of having a conversation. She more feels them, and she was really worried because this girl is set in the Victorian England, and it's called Violet Vale, and this girl is lives in a house on the edge of the graveyard because her dad's a it's not a mortician, undertaker, thank you. And so she's keen to try and help, so she goes into the parlor where they got all these coffins, and she was worried that all of that would be taken out. None of it was taken out. All of that was absolutely fine, but it was one line, and I forgot what she said, but it was to do with she often was envious of the dead fast asleep on their stone pillows. And that was taken out because the editors thought that might scare children enough that they won't want to go to sleep.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it?
It's also one of the signs of like suicide. So like radiation. So it's like I can understand why they
say that.
Yeah. So I mean, suicide's a really interesting thing because it's become a bit of a zeitgeist subject. And yet when I was growing up, it was really clear that you do not mention it, particularly in children's books, because of the contagion factor, because it's really easy to kind of create sort of this obsession around it. And there was a lot of documented evidence that, you know, it starts to kind of catch on as a mind virus in a way. And that's gone completely out the window, which I think is interesting. I don't know whether that's because, you know, researchers showed it wasn't true, or whether it's just because people don't care or there's no way to stop it because of social media or whatever the reason is. But it's really interesting to me because I look at this now and go, wow, like when I was starting out, did not mention it.
I think people forget generationally. They forget because they didn't read it when they were a kid.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. But the thing that I got cut out of the book, which was the most bizarre, right? So I wrote a very innocuous, quite sweet little picture book called Mad Dog the Chef, which was about a dog that could cook food because he was tired of dog food, and so he became a gourmet chef, right? So this was the idea of it. And he had a little sidekick that was a Jack Russell Terrier, which I had at that time. So it was based on my dog Gomez. And when my dog got excited, he used to pee himself. So of course I put that in the book. And I put something like he was, you know, peeing like a sprinkler system or something, rolling around peeing like a sprinkler because he was so excited. And they took it out. They were really upset about it. And I just thought it was so funny and so true to what this dog did. And I've seen other dogs do it. But no, that was not okay. And that was really my first book, really. I'd done another book before that, but not in the children's space. So I was quite surprised. I was like, oh, wow, okay, that joke's, because you see fart jokes and bottom jokes and all sorts of stuff all the time in kids. But this was a step too far, which I was shocked by.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So next thing here. Anyone else? There we are. So Just a moment. Lock the notes here. There you go. I went to flip onto a new tab and I closed the one I needed. So
Oh, okay.
it happens. Nobody killed me. Okay, cool. So when you have a story idea, so you've got your idea of your story that you want to do for your kids and stuff. So how do you decide what format is best? Like when you keeping your mind, your age, and maybe your illustration that you want to put into, how do you figure out how to fix it, basically?
Yeah. So because I've worked across a lot of different formats, both as a writer and an editor, you get to know pretty quickly once you do it. But once you first start out, it's actually not that obvious. So one of the things to really think about is the complexity of the story, because that'll give you age range, and it'll give you word count, and it'll give you kind of a sense of what kind of format's going to work. And I don't mean the complexity of the idea. So one of my very first picture books was actually about child refugees in Australia, which had never been done before. And it was called A True Person. And I was trying to get across this idea that children are being held in that at that time. It's not happening quite so much at the moment. It changes with policy. But at that time, children were being held in detention facilities. And so this book was really about that. And that's quite a heavy subject and quite a complex subject. But the story was actually very simple. And the story was, again, from a child's point of view, what does that look like? And where's the hope come in that world? Because it's all about hope, right? Because that's why people become refugees, because they're looking for something that is better. So that hope became the key point. And because I wanted this to be something that was about hope and really focused on one thing, it was obvious it had to be a picture book. Now, that made it really, really hard to publish, like unbelievably difficult. But finally, it did get published. But I think if I'd done something as a middle grade novel, or it would have got across the line far quicker. Because after that book was published, then it kind of broke the ice a bit. And then a lot more of those books around that got published in children's books across a number of things. But I think the key is complexity. I mean, that's essentially what you work it out to be.
I agree with that, because I tend to write middle grade, but my editor keeps telling me there's no such thing as this term, but I write upper middle grade or crossover into YA. We were hoping that the category teen would come out, which is those 11, 12-year-olds. But I write for them, and it's not an official space in publishing. Like, you wouldn't go to an agent and say, hi, I write upper middle grade. You just say, I write middle grade. But you say, I write middle grade for confident readers, or something like that to imply it's older. So I'm often struggling with the fact that my brain wants to go, or the complex of the story wants to go further. Even with this one, I was like, right, I'm firmly middle grade, I'm aiming at 10-year-olds, and then it's evolved. So I think the story, and I'm saying this fully aware that I have to think about the age group I'm writing for, but I think if you have a rough idea of the age group you want to write for, but not let it hold you back, because that's what editing's for. Because I was struggling for ages with, no, my voice is middle grade, I want to write middle grade, I don't want to write YA, but teen doesn't exist. And my editor said that we will find a place for it. We just might need to edit down some bits when you've written it. But that's where, and this might actually lead on to the next question, that's where working with your editor, whether you're self-employed and hire one, self-publishing and hire one, or whether you're working with an editor at a published house, is really helpful, because you know your story, you know what you're writing, but they know the industry, and that's where that connection it's the best thing that's ever happened to me is having an editor. Michelle wanted to talk on that.
Oh, just because I self-published, so you don't automatically come with that team. You have to build it. And I think some of the mistakes that I see writers making, which can be fixed once you realize it's a mistake. If you're a parent like I am, so let's say I have a 10-year-old girl, and even though I teach and I meet other 10-year-old girls, I know my 10-year-old girl best and kind of assume that all 10-year-old girls are like her. So that can be helpful in some ways if you're like, I'm writing this for kids who are exactly like my daughter. But less helpful if you have no feedback, though. If you never have any feedback or someone to come around and say, like, this is too intense for the audience that you're intending. And you're like, well, my 14-year-old would be fine. Great, sell to your 14-year-old. So it can work. It can guide you and work as an inspiration, but you do need to build a team and have some feedback for reasons like that. I've seen it happen in the classroom too, where somebody makes a lesson plan for the kids that they have known, and then it quickly have to adjust when you're in the class and go, oh, okay,
Yeah.
my kid is not, the average or whatever, so you just have to be willing to adjust and have feedback.
And on the theme of an editor, I think that there can be a fear almost of an editor in that, oh, they're going to come and destroy my story and tell me I can't do this and I can't do that. Not at all. The editor works with you. So the current trend at the moment is for middle grade books that are aimed at more confident readers to be written in first person present tense. A lot of them are written that way at the moment that are being published. I struggle with that. I can't do it. And the very first thing I said to my editor, she said, have you tried writing this in first person? I said, yes, I can't. I just can't. Third person's my thing. And she said, fine. Then we just got to concentrate on you getting closer into your character's head. So she knew I was not prepared to write in that way. So she's like, I'll work with you to make sure that your book is the best it can be based on the way that you want to write it. They're not there to destroy your dreams or to rip your book apart and change it into something else. They are there to make sure that what you've written is the best it can be. And I don't know about Gabriel, but I found that because I have a screenwriting background, same as her, in film, you work as a team. And so it kind of makes sense to me that people come with different skills. But I've noticed that some writers can be fearful of an editor. And it's all these misconceptions. That's all it is. It's just to what they believe an editor is going to do. An editor isn't a writer for a reason.
Yeah. So, well,
I know you're an editor and a writer. But...
Yeah. But I have to do, you have to compartmentalize it. So you can't, I can't edit my own work, and I would never try to do that. But one of the things that I think comes up a lot, and this is sort of more to Michelle's point, is self-published authors don't get that access to an editor the way we do through a traditional publishing house. And honestly, even within traditional publishing houses, it's getting harder. Like a lot of publishers that I work with as an editor expect the work to be pretty polished before they'll even consider it now. And I really just work with the celebrity writers who just have got the name and therefore they'll spend the money on them. But I think there's a real opportunity for self-published writers to get connected with editors. The problem is it's not cheap, right? Editing is an incredibly time-consuming thing to do, as writing is. So there's no way that you can actually, charge what the amount of hours that it actually takes. But you've got to kind of think about what's a reasonable amount and how can I live as an editor and how can, an author afford this, and all those things come in. But I think there is a real thing at the moment, and Michelle might talk about this a bit more, that self-published authors kind of think, but we don't need that because we can just go straight to Ingram Spark, or we can go straight to Amazon and just upload it ourselves. And this is really exciting and we can do this. And I think that's really devalued their work in ways that they
Yeah.
don't even understand, because they don't have that automatic, this is just what happens.
Yeah,
One
so
thing-
I follow a lot of indie publishers who are very successful, and so if you read their interviews or you pay attention to what they're doing, they're hiring editors,
Yeah.
even if they're also using a critique group or whatever.
Yeah.
First, they are still have an editor involved at some point most of the time, so look at the people who are successful or whose stories that you like and see what they're doing. And everyone, even if it's not an official editor, everyone has some kind of team. Yeah.
And
who
make
has a
sure-
successful story.
And
Yeah.
make sure the editor you get understands children's fiction.
Yeah.
Because you don't want an editor who's only got experience of adult fiction editing a
Yeah.
middle grade,
Yeah, that's
unless
right.
they're actively trying it. I mean, like, I used one when I was looking at self-publishing, and she said to me, she wrote children's fiction, she edited adult fiction, and she said, I want to try and get into children's fiction. Can I edit your book for you? And then I can say, oh, I've edited children's fiction, and I'll offer it for free. And I said, yeah, of course. And she was fantastic, but I knew that I was her experiment to see if she could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Since I've done some picture books and self publishing, we're definitely not saying that all self publishers don't use an editor,
Yeah.
but I did notice it a lot in picture books specifically. Like if I was trying to make friends with other people, I guess in the wrong places it turned out, but I would look at their picture book that they had already hit publish on Amazon, and there would be errors. And I'm like, there are like 200 words in your book. Did you not have enough? So it kind of becomes more embarrassing than a few typos in a long novel, if that makes sense. So people tend to think that books for younger children and shorter books are easier, and they are in some ways time-wise, but it doesn't mean you can get away with just not having any kind of team to look over your book.
There's a very famous quote by Proust that I use for my students all the time when I'm teaching writing for children, because it is this kind of idea of brevity. And he was writing a letter. He was on a coach and he was writing a letter, and it ended up being like 15 pages long. And at the end, he wrote, I'm sorry this letter is so long. I didn't have time to write you a short one.
Yeah.
It's really important to understand that actually writing brevity well is time consuming, and it's a skill. And an editor can help you, cut stuff down. And I do spend a lot of time cutting stuff down, but a lot of that's because, there are economic issues, there are issues around readership and what certain genres, will attract, readers with word count and stuff like that. But as a general rule.
Speaking of word count, that's something I forgot to mention at the beginning with what are editors, what are publishers looking for? Shorter everything. If you're writing chapter books, make them shorter. If you're writing picture book, middle grade, I mean, I'm doing 40,000 words for mine, and that's pushing it. They're really looking at 35,000 words. YA, shorter the better. They're looking at 70,000 to 80,000, and that again is pushing it. If you can do 60,000, brilliant. So shorter at the moment, which breaks my heart as a longer reader, but
Well, I think there's no middle anymore. So there's either shorter or you've got a series of 50 of them.
Yes.
And that's what they're looking for. Like, series are massive in kids' books. And I think Diary of a Wimpy Kid has got 450 episodes. I don't know. Some ridiculous amount. There's just so many.
The one that I'm doing is a potential series. They want it as a series. There's like a standalone each book, but a series. So how do you detail them? Oh, with them being so short, how do you add detail to them? Is that what you mean? So basically, that's one thing that I've been struggling with because my last middle grade book was 65,000 words, which my editor said was too long. It comes down to choosing your words really carefully. So for me, I don't worry about the word count in my first draft, and I'll know that it's going to be longer because I can then take bits away. But I guess if you're really struggling and you really want that detail, what I've done is I've taken whole strands out. So on mine, I looked at it and I said, do you know what? She doesn't need to go to school in this. I can sell it during the summer holidays. So I take out a whole strand of her attending school. It wasn't adding much to the story.
So a subplot, simplifying the plot to make room for detail.
Yeah, exactly. Less subplot so that you got your main plots. Have a look, see if there are any characters you can cut out. Originally, I had the villain have a ghost boy character. I've got rid of all of that. My villain is a lot more simplified. He still is complex, you know, in what he wants, but I made him more, in a way, it's made him stronger because he's now acting on his own beliefs, not for a loss of his child. And actually, in middle grade, if you're talking detail like describing things, they're not as engaged with long detailed description. You know, Harry Potter was 20 years ago. That was what we read. We've now got a younger audience that are far more interested in the plot and the character than what the world looks like. That's not to say you can't build on that in later books, or there's also not to say that when you're already established and have a reader base, you can't then write longer books. But this is talking when you're an unknown and you're going into that space and your readers don't trust you yet, they don't know you yet. They will fall in love with the characters and the plot before they fall in love with the world nowadays.
Children's fiction in pretty much every age range is very much about action. So you're thinking more about verbs than you're thinking about adjectives. That's kind of the way to think about it. So as you get older, as you start to move up the age range with your demographics, with your readership, you add more adjectives. And at some point you can add an adverb, which is very exciting. But as a general rule, what they want is they want things to move, and they don't need a lot of detailed description. One, they're imaginative. Two, they're kind of caught up often in the cadence of the words and the way that the story unfolds. And also, particularly in the younger things, there's a performative access element of that, which is mum or dad or grandma or whoever it is reading it to them. So there's a lot of stuff that kind of, in adult fiction, it's very different. They want a lot more sort of detail. Although, again, from a screenwriting background, I found if I think in scenes and I think, what do I need? I want my person to visualize this, but I don't want to dictate it to them. And so that's really helped me a lot with this stuff.
Yeah.
Just because more in my adult fiction I write, I have the short form has always been my obsession. So like I just wrote a drabble, which is only 100 words. It was almost 300 words first before I edited it down. And when it comes down to it, the shorter it is, the less detail there will be. There is no getting around that. You kind of cut down to what is essential. And whether it's adult or children's fiction, it doesn't mean you can't have detail if it's a short story or longer. The drabble ended up having not a lot. Like, they're at a lake and that's about almost it. But you use it more strategically. You have like a section of dialogue, you're introducing something, you have description then, and it's not peppered throughout as much. It's very strategic and it's cut down.
And I think in kids lit nowadays, if you mention anything in the setting, kids will think it's important. So they'll hold on to that information. They'll think it's a clue. It's that kind of
Like you don't want
So,
to distract them
yeah,
with details that aren't important. Exactly. So if you're introducing a person or they're walking somewhere the first time, you're more likely to use some detail there, but still we want more action than detail.
yeah. Did that answer your question, T-Boy?
So yeah, like a
Also,
short story.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we probably should move on. Next thing, you've actually covered a lot, which is good. I am very proud of you. If we can talk a little bit about working with an illustrator, if you cannot illustrate your own books, if not everyone has the talent to do both. So, how do you work with an illustrator?
So my experience working with an illustrator with children's books, I've had three very different experiences. The first I had, the illustrator actually came up with the idea for the book and then needed a writer. So it was very illustrator led. So that was a really interesting situation to have an illustrator come and look for a writer, and then I developed a story. So she had characters. This is the dog one. So she had characters, and she had an idea to do a cookbook, and the publisher said, we don't want a cookbook, but we like the idea of a dog that cooks, so we'll match you with a writer. So in that thing, it became all about her style, right? So her style dictated. It was very comic, it was very bright and breezy and all that kind of stuff. When I did A True Person, which was the refugee story, I'd written the thing like a screenplay, because when you're writing a screenplay, you're writing for vision. So you sort of get used to doing that. A bit like you write comic books, it's very similar. And for a number of reasons, the publisher decided that they wanted to get a refugee to illustrate it, which seemed like a really good idea. And I was all into that. I was like, yeah, great, fantastic. But they came back and they were so dark and desolate and angry. And these were adult refugees who had essentially come over to Australia. We have waves of immigration. It's kind of worked. So they come over in the 70s and 80s, and they were lovely, lovely people. There were two of them. And I spoke to them, and I said, this is about hope, and it's about being bright and being, and moving past this, and really understanding that these are people, and we really want to, have a positive thing with it. And it's all about recognizing people as human. And it just didn't. I got barbed wire, and it felt like mouse, right? It was so negative. So I eventually just said, you can't publish it like that. It won't work. It's a complete disconnect. And so they brought another illustrator in, Jackie Granford, who was amazing. And she did these incredible watercolor paintings that are beautiful. And if you get the chance to see the book, I think her illustration is better than my writing, actually. They're absolutely gorgeous. So that was usually it's publisher led. If you're in the traditional publishing world, the publisher chooses. I was very, very lucky that they listened to me in that situation. But generally, the publisher will have a stable of illustrators, and they'll match you to who they think works with your story. That's usually how it works.
But besides choosing an illustrator, do you send the illustrator any notes, or is it more about just writing the text the appropriate way and not spending an entire sentence describing what the illustrator is going to put on the picture?
So with picture books, one of the things that I did when I first started out was I would just put in brackets a little bit of basically a thumbnail of what would work for this illustration. About 60% of the time was ignored. About 40% of the time they did it. And I had no real say over any of that. But you've got to, again, I think this is something Rebecca mentioned earlier. You've got to trust the people that you're working with and trust that they've got great skill. Even the illustrators who weren't right for A True Person were great illustrators. And I've actually used one of them for something else much later on that just worked with them. But that trust, it came the other way as well. Like the publisher said, I trust me. I trust the writer to know that this isn't right, and that was great. But I was engaged with that process, which was fantastic. But often that isn't the case. It wasn't the case with Little Rosie Runaway. I didn't get any say over that. I loved the illustration at the end. I never met her. I had no idea what she was, but it was lovely. It was really nice. So, I think after a while they just, you got to trust who you're working with.
So then it's more about writing the text appropriately, so you're not duplicating the work of what an illustrator would do, or not trying to dictate what they would do even.
That's it. If you get the tone right and you get that, Steve's question earlier kind of comes into this. If you leave enough space for the illustrator to come in and be part of the storytelling with you, they will always come in and do it. They'll just, that's if you get a good illustrator. And I guess I've been really lucky because all the illustrators that I've engaged with have been unbelievably talented, and they know what they're doing, and they haven't just been started out. Even when I was just starting out, I was very lucky to be matched. And I think that's something you would look for if you're new in this space. Find an illustrator who's really, experienced, because they will help you so much.
Yes, unfortunately, the self-publishing spaces are flooded with AI people.
Yeah.
So you have to be even careful now. It's not just that experience, because I can draw and paint, but I also know that I don't. I also knew when I didn't have the artistic experience to, say, draw a person making different expressions, which you're going to have to do through a book. So even just seeing one example isn't enough. It has to be somebody who really knows and has some experience, and not somebody trying to pass off AI in a way that, like, you could see ridiculous examples of characters changing ages throughout the book. That's something you have to really be careful about.
AI is absolutely anathema to what we should be doing. I totally understand the economic thing. I totally understand the accessibility thing and all that stuff, but it just sucks so much life out of stuff, and it just all ends up looking pretty much the same.
And for
a picture book, it's supposed to, the pictures are supposed to match throughout the book. That's not something that AI is good at.
Can we just clarify, we're talking about the generation part of it, not the AI that can help with your grammar or sticky words or things like that. Because there's different, you're talking like chat
visual
and
we're talking about like visual art, where the book is published and the kids in the book change ages from page to page in the illustration.
Yeah.
So you do have to be careful getting somebody who's experienced.
And also, I've noticed AI can create some rather inappropriate things in the background, shall we say?
Yeah. I mean, the problem with AI is it's not engaged emotionally with the subject. Bottom line, it might look fine, but it's all going to be surface. And I just think we can get a bit bedazzled by that and go, oh wow, this looks like a really shiny, happy little thing, but there's nothing under it, and that lack, what they call the uncanny valley, right? You see it, and I see this in a lot of, because I'm on a lot of sites, groups and stuff, because I like to see what people are doing, and I'm always seeing people putting up their covers. And I just look at them and go, no, why? Like, I understand that it's cheap. And
so you want, I'm sorry, I didn't really mean to bring up AI as a general controversy. More of an experience, or making sure that if you're self-publishing, that the person that you're hiring and talking to has ways to show that they have experience. Like, if AI gets good enough that in the future that they can start with AI, they're still going to have to change it. They're still going to have to know how to paint over it or work with it or whatever. So it's going to come down to experience, and can this person even produce what you want, whether they're drawing by hand or AI. I just meant it's made it easier for people to kind of make it look like they know how to illustrate.
And
when
And
they
that is something, it is a good point to be wary of, because I've got a friend who like buys covers and then writes the story for the cover. It's a thing in the indie space. But she's now stopping doing that because so many of the covers are made by AI and she doesn't want that. So it is something for people to be aware of, that when you're looking at these things, just double check, make sure.
and
there
make
are
sure you have
things
enough
to say.
samples up, or that, like, when you hire them, if they're saying, I'm going to send you sketches, whatever, they have a process where you have some way to influence what's coming out or back out if they end up handing you something that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I apologize for bringing up AI. I meant it more as just a buyer beware, like, know what you're buying. If you're the one who has to find the illustrator, it's going to be less of a problem in a trad published house where they know their illustrators.
Well, I think there's also now much more temptation for writers to do their own illustration using AI, which I also think is probably not going to work out that great. I mean, I look at people like Quentin Blake, and that you wouldn't call that great art, but it's fantastic illustration. And it just, you don't. It's about that quirk, that the sense of having a personality that really brings it up. Maybe we're old fashioned. I don't know. There might be a whole generation of people who love AI art. They'll be all quite happy.
I mean, like, if you look at the results, though, right now, if somebody hires somebody who does AI to illustrate their book, they're going to be unhappy for their picture book because the pictures are not going to match. AI is not there, even if you don't have moral objections to it, but it's allowing people to shortcut and make themselves look like they know what they're doing and take your money. So you have to be careful, and you have to see many samples and see that this person has a history and can produce good artwork, however they do it.
Yeah,
even if you don't have
the same with writing. It's the same thing. I'm hopeful that the AI thing will kind of be a little bit of a bump, and people go, actually, it's not meaningful. It's not connecting to us emotionally. It's fine for technical writing. It's fine for copywriting, whatever. But actually, creative writing, let's move on. I'm really hopeful that will happen because I think it's not great. Sorry, we go on.
But I'm totally blaming Michelle, but I tried this. But we have just a few minutes left, but I think we have time for one more thing briefly. You want to maybe cover a little bit about how you would market your picture books and whatever children's fiction stuff. How does that look for you, basically?
And how is it different from adult fiction?
Firstly, I'd want to say that people have the misconception that when you're traditionally publishing, you don't have to do any marketing. That couldn't be further from the truth. The expectation is that you'll visit schools, you'll talk to kids, you'll be on social media, engaging directly with them. So I just wanted to put that in first of all.
Yeah, I will put it as marketing right now. That's not right. You just constantly, because traditional publishers have a finite resource, and so the more you can resource them, and the more you can engage with your audience, the better your book will be. The more the publisher will like you, the more likely they're going to publish your next book. Even if it doesn't sell all that well, they're going to go, yeah, but she gets in there, she tries. So there's definitely schools are really important, libraries are really important. Make friends with your librarians, get to know them. Don't wait until your book's out either. So if you're thinking you want to be a writer, just go and know get to know all the librarians. Because they're incredibly influential. And of course the schools are really, I'm just doing a big school tour at the moment for the Battle of Victoria Street. And it's a lot. It's there are so many schools and you have to email them all and then you've got to kind of organize it all and it's logistically really challenging, but you have to do it. It's just, it's the job.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I found, it's pretty much the same for self-publishing, except that with traditional publishing, you might have a little bit more of a foot in the door because it just, if a publisher comes to a library or a school, obviously they automatically look more legitimate, right? But it's the same in that you have to go to events, you have to put the physical book out there. I think especially for picture books, the younger the reader is, the more people want to see the book in their hands. That's what I've seen anyway. And compared to self-publishing, adult fiction, in adult fiction, a lot of times self-publishing finds the ebook is the most successful. Like they might offer a print copy, but their numbers wise, the ebook sells the most or makes the most money. With a picture book, you could put an ebook up. Nobody's going to buy it. Yeah. You have to
And
go to
that's the
events.
same.
Yeah.
That's the same across all kids lit, except maybe YA. Middle grade, it's that they're not reading Kindle. They're not reading on their iPad. You know, they're on their iPad for other things. They want a physical book when they're reading.
Yeah. And librarians hate you.
Yeah, well, and the adults who are buying the book, you know, you're marketing to them too, and they want to see it. They want something physical for their kids, not just something that's. My kids do actually read a lot on Kindle, but mostly the books that they can get through the library app. So
yeah, and that is a thing. So you know, the publisher will always make it available on Kindle, but you're thinking that other than when it's borrowed from, like, say, a library app or a school library or something like that, when it's bought, it's almost always bought on one of two things: either it's a present from parents, grandparents, or it's the child goes into a bookshop and it appeals to them. They see it and the cover and all of that, it appeals to them. So that's, you know, I've seen it. Parents go into the bookshop, okay, you can choose one book, and they're going around and they do judge a book by its cover. Another reason to pay for a cover artist. But yeah, so physical media, and I'd say talking to the kids, because there's something about kids where if they get to talk to you, the author, and they get to know you, the author, they're a lot more engaged in, you know, they'll go into the bookshop and be like, oh, this author came to my school, what's her books, you know, and they're a lot more wanting to read it if they've met the author.
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. But even from the parent side, like, just we want a physical book for a kid.
Yeah.
For them to hold.
Well, because you're often reading it with them. And that, again, that goes right up to middle grade. You know, the amount of times that I've sat there with my godchildren, my nieces and nephews, you know, sitting there reading Harry Potter with them or whatever, and it's us reading together, you know. So
yeah, with me, I'm a librarian in an elementary school, so obviously I have my physical books, and I find that the kids are really into physical books, and especially I find even with especially the little ones, they're really like, this is my book. And sometimes you get little ones that are so excited to see their favorite book on their shelves, and they're like, I'm going to borrow this book, and like, I've read it before. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And then they're like, I have it at home. I'm like, why are you taking this one home too?
They do.
And they really get really excited about it. It's really funny. But I would find it, it was interesting, like listening to what you were saying about the different things with children's fiction, because I'm on the other side. I'm the librarian. I'm the one who puts them in his hands, so it's kind of cool. And there are some times where, but for me, I try to, because I'm a librarian in elementary school, I'm actually reading a lot of the books myself. So I want to know what's in them, what they're about. And sometimes you'll have a few kids who are, they want to choose a book that maybe I think is more advanced for them, but technically they're in the same age range, you know. So sometimes with those, I might say, I will ask your teacher's permission because the teachers know them better than me. Or sometimes I will even write a note home to the parents that, hey, your kid wants to read such and such a thing. Is this okay? So I try to work it out that way.
Please tell us what country you're in.
I'm in Canada.
I feel like I'm in the United States, so I feel like that would never happen here. But I would just
No,
say, you know,
that's how I run things. But yeah, no. I mean, just like for example, there was a book where it's a fairly popular book here, and it it's like a sailing ship thing, and I have read it before, and I knew it had a scene in it where one of the characters gets whipped or something like that. So I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not sure. So I actually asked the parent, this is the scene that's happened. Are they ready for this kind of thing? So, and yes, so I'll make sure I try to not traumatize my children.
oh, and maybe you did say elementary school too, right? So
Elementary school.
I do know when I was in elementary school, I don't think it worked like that. I just picked books off the shelf. And of course, most of mine were horse books, so there's nothing. They whipped some of the horses.
I think it depends on the school as well, because I'm a government primary school.
I'm a librarian, right? Hello.
And in that
I
school,
think we should probably wrap up here. That was a really amazing panel, and I'm really happy about that. I know the next people are ready to go, so I want to thank you guys so much for coming, and it was really great and informative, and I am very proud of all of you. So,
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
thank
I'm
you.
going to end the recording here. So thank you again, and bye.
All right. Thank you.